You have done public speaking and keynote speaking. Is that something still you see in your future? You actually blazed that trail before anybody else was doing it as drummers.
Well, I was very fortunate to have had, particularly in the early 80s, a platform from which I could spread my wings. Public speaking was something that I'd never done. And I said, okay, I've never done that. I'm going to learn how to do that. And I have done that since the early 80s and continue to do that today to corporate groups, charity organizations, all sorts of different. You give me a week and a half and I can write a half-hour speech on anything. And I do weave in stories of my career. One of the most important aspects of my career, in my view, was the 17 years I spent at NBC, which at the time was owned by General Electric. And at General Electric, if you're a director of a department, in those days, they're out of that business, but you had to be you were a department head. You had to take training in this efficiency program that was developed by Motorola in the 1960s called Six Sigma, which is basically a productivity management program. And the idea was if you're making, widgets, you're going to have a certain amount of errors just by virtue of the fact that you're using machines. And for example, a blade will get dull. So the more you do it, the more opportunity you have for mistakes, as they call them. So you want to limit those mistakes to 6 events per million opportunities. This is in manufacturing. So the idea in the seminars that I took was to take that training, Six Sigma, and apply it to your division, which in my case was the music department of the late night program, which was an executive position. It was not a drumming position or music position. It was really a bureaucratic position, corporate, very, very corporate. You're working for, at the time, the biggest corporation in the world, General Electric, and there's a bottom line. So that I was in my 40s when I started embracing that, and it really helped me because I could take those sort of modus operandi and apply it to my day job, and then even apply it to the hour that I got to show off on TV playing drums. That was purely a creation of, I have this position, jazz drumming, and I don't consider myself a jazz drummer, but, watching Buddy, getting to know Buddy, being in, Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra resurrected Buddy's career. And so he was the guy, he and Eddie Shaughnessy were the guys who were the most visible drummers on TV in the 60s and 70s. And, they were jazz era players, obviously, big band players. And so when I got the TV job, I had to, this is several years after Buddy's passing, I had to reinvent myself. So rock drumming on TV is not terribly visual. The kind of rock drumming I do, I think I come from the Charlie Watts school of drumming and Ringo Starr. So it's not particularly visual. And the only mandate they gave me, NBC, was that I can't play jazz. Well, that I wasn't a jazz player because my good friend Branford Marsalis, was playing jazz on the Tonight Show. You can't play funk because the Arsenio Hall show was on. We don't want blues, which G.E. Smith was playing. Paul Schaefer's got the rock thing locked up, so we don't want a rock band. So you can do whatever else you want, but it can't be those 4 genres. So I kind of latched on to jump blues, which was, as you know, Don, the sort of missing link, not so missing, between big band and rock music, spurned by the economics of the Second World War, where you couldn't afford to have, 22 people in a band, and it went down, a combination of big band drummers playing rhythm and blues. And it was rock, it was muscular music, but it also had a dotted 8th and 16th note feel, a swing feel. Very so that's much what we played. And one of the guys in my band, Scott Healy, who was an incredible musician, incredible jazz pianist, after about 6 or 8 months, he goes, you're really getting the hang of the jazz thing. Here's a record, check this out. And he gave me Atomic Basie. So I started getting, and I'd never listened to any of that stuff. But jazz started and ended with 3 records I had. I had a Gene Krupa record. I had the Buddy Rich's first big band, and I had a compilation that Irv Cotler, our good friend, played on that was called Persistent Percussion. And it was all the big studio musicians of the day in the, I guess, early 60s, 61, 62, Conti Condoli, Plas Johnson, great musicians. And so that was the extent of what I knew about jazz, other than what I saw on TV. So the guys in my band are so versatile, and the TV band was so versatile. It was a perfect situation because it was a workshop during the day. I'd play a chart for 3 months before I debuted it. There was an incredible air check by Chick Webb, called Harlem Congo, which is blisteringly fast, and the permutations of just changing directions were incredible. It took me 3 months to learn that chart. But, I had these great musicians at my disposal for 3 hours of rehearsal every day, and then, play the show at night. And it was the one thing in my life, the combination of the business, the commercial side that I was ready for, and the ability to embarrass myself playing in our little rehearsal room to learn how to do that. And one of the things I always wanted to do, which I did do for a year, was put a 15-piece big band together and play Basie, Buddy, Maynard Ferguson, Stan
and you kicked the heck out of that band too, by the way.
That was a great band, great musicians. And, it was fun because, it was not a rehearsal band. I wanted it to harken back to the 1930s territory bands where there were no charts. So after about a month and a half, everybody had every single song. We had about 50 songs we knew. They had it down. And so I wanted it to be a real freewheeling roadhouse band. So it was really fun. It was incredibly expensive to mount, but it was so much fun to do. And there's a tape of me doing a drum, and I did a drum solo every night. I never did a drum solo. And, I just copied everything that I thought Buddy would do. I'm nobody, there's nobody like Buddy Rich, but, you can kind of pay homage to the man by, doing so. I mean, I still, when I watch Buddy's clips, my son's education really came, a lot of it, just watching Buddy Rich clips. And, taking him to jazz clubs when he, I said, okay, if you like that.
That's a lesson unto itself.
Well, let's go see Billy Cobham. He was playing at the Blue Note, and, and some of the other great jazz drummers who were still playing around. And that was fun. It was quite a bonding thing. But so, I was the smiling drummer in the suit, kicking the band along, which was it was a throwback to what I'd seen in the 60s. And my band, because we swung everything, whether it was a Beatles song or an Iron Maiden song or a, Ozzy Osbourne song, we would swing it, play the swing beat to it, which was a hook. And, when we would come back from commercial and the camera would be on my hands, I would do some fancy little lick, which in most bands would get you fired, but because you had 6 seconds to do something fancy, and they encouraged me to do that. So it was built for TV, different than playing, it was a little different than playing just live. Sure. It was built for TV because you could do a lot more, quote unquote, fancy drumming, which with the cameras on your hands and you're doing these fast rolls, and crossovers and the crazy little stuff I picked up, it looked effective. And you find out very quickly if it's effective, you do it again on TV.
We had talked about a little earlier the importance of being in shape, and you had mentioned also about being relaxed, and that was something that you wanted to impart on Jay so much. And it's really important, I think, for young drummers. Maybe we go back and talk about that again for a second. In your experience, you had some problems with carpal tunnel, if I'm remembering correctly,
Well,
right?
it wasn't carpal tunnel, Don. It was tendonitis, and that came from anxiety, gripping the sticks tightly. And also, actually, I studied for about 8 months with a very well-known drum educator on the East Coast, whose name I won't reveal, who had a technique where you really squeezed the sticks, particularly your left hand, if you're using a military style. The idea was to develop the muscle that's, this muscle.
That's your fulcrum muscle,
So
yeah.
you squeeze the sticks really tight. And it felt unnatural. And he used the Mahler method, but you held the sticks really tightly. And that led to the beginning of what I had was tendonitis from gripping the sticks tightly. It took me years and many surgeries, 10 surgeries on my hands, which this is why it's so important, particularly to relax your hands, your whole body, but particularly your hands. You don't have to play histrionically and quote loud to make impact. As a matter of fact, so one of the great lessons I learned when I was trying to get my technique back together was studying for about 3 years with Joe Morello.
I wanted to hear about that.
Well, he literally lived up the road from me in New Jersey right off the Garden State Parkway. And we became great pals. This was about 10, 12 years before he passed on. And in the first lesson, he said, "Oh, play me the fastest single stroke roll you can." And I did. And it was all about tension and gritting my teeth, right? So he was able to he said, "Do it again." He was so fast and so precise. He was able to insert an eighth note into my single stroke roll and turn it into a triplet.
Amazing.
With complete relaxation. Then he showed me on a snare drum. He had such a snap in his arm and his wrist, because for him it was shoulder, elbow, wrist, not much fingers. He had such power that he put the stick an inch over the drum and hit a rim shot that took my head off. It was amazing. I mean, of course, this is a guy who lost his vision when he was in his early 20s. So he just constantly, as he said, when they were on tour, he'd be out at the pool with his pad and his drumsticks, playing all day. But he really taught me the idea of relaxing and release. And I don't know what you call it precisely, but when you actually strike the drum, you throw the drum down, and you throw the stick down onto the drum. You release it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was really hard to learn how to do that. And he said, "Okay, well, you're going to play this at a tempo of 30 beats a minute." That's unbelievably slow.
Yes.
I mean, you could drive a caravan of tanks through the time it takes between two quarter notes at 30 beats per minute. But the idea was to really slow down what I was doing. And it took me a very long time to internalize that. It was this was before he came out with his book. And it was a great way he was my drum guru. He looked at my bad habits and he enabled me. It was very frustrating. He enabled me to break myself of those habits. And as I've gotten older, I mean, I can play for 4 hours. I don't get tired. I don't get physically tired because I'm developing the power without using the energy. And that's a concept that I learned later in life. I also studied for about a year with the late, great wild man, Gary Chester.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of guys, Kenny Aronoff studied with him, and he lived up in Brewster, New York, or New City, New York he lived in. I drive up there, it was about 2 hours. And his thing was interesting because he would take these old drum books, progressive studies for the drum, and he would use those, but he would get everything. He would completely turn your world upside down. You would play it you play everything with your left hand and your left foot. He wanted to break you of all your habits. And the most important, which was, and the idea is, you don't really do this. I mean, I've seen Kenny Aronoff play with his left hand on the hi-hat, and that's one of the things he got. You don't really have to do that, but what it does is it develops your weak side. The most important thing I learned from Gary Chester was he would take phone calls. The dog would run in his office where the studio was. His daughter would run in asking for the keys to the car. His wife would come in and say, dinner's ready. Every 2 minutes, there was some sort of distraction. And at first I was like, wait a minute, I'm paying for this hour. But he had a method, and the method was, don't let anything distract you. And I said to him after about 6 months, I said, Gary, not for nothing, but here we are, and the dog is running in, and you're leaving, and the phone is ringing. He goes, there's a reason for that. And this was before when I was writing The Big Beat. I did an interview with him, which is actually never been published. It was before I did the TV show, and I was searching. I've always been searching to get better. In the E Street Band, they call me Mr. Self-Improvement. And someone told me about Gary, and I knew Gary from the rock records he played on, which he always dismissed as pure fluff. But to my generation, he was one of the greatest rock drummers in history. And he always poo-pooed it as, he never actually felt that he was he was very, very successful. He was the East Coast Hal Blaine, but he never felt he really made it, because everybody wanted to be Buddy Rich or Gene Krupa. Gary Chester won the 1952 Gene Krupa contest. So it became a big deal, but the big bands died out, and he went into recording, where he made a tremendous living through for 30 years. But that idea that you can, and he was right, don't let distractions, when you're playing, for example, in a stadium, and people are throwing stuff or balloons or whatever, it's raining, it's windy, it's cold, it's hot. You can't let it distract you. You have to focus, and focus can be developed. So the idea through Joe Morello was relaxation, and it has to do with your posture. Are you bending over? People have noticed that when I play, I'm very straight when I play. Because I also, one of the things I do, and I was on the board of a medical facility in the 80s, I put a little 3-inch piece of plywood under the rear leg of my drum stool, the drum throne, which tilts it. And when you do that, it puts a slight, it forces you. It's like that chair where you sit on your knees, a balance chair. It forces you to correct your posture and put the S curve back in your spine. Instead of, leaning over, you're like this, and your lower back won't get tired. So that's a little trick. Put a 3/4 inch piece of plywood just under the rear leg, and you'll see it tilts it, and it elevates tilts the drum throne.
Probably helps your feet float a little bit more too. Helps your feet probably a little bit more.
Yeah, and drummers have their preferences. I like to sit somewhat high. I like to have leverage over the drums. I sit high and I keep everything low. Gene Thaler, my original drum teacher, was a nut about keeping he exaggerated, but your elbows should always be touching your ribs. And, as a little kid, I was a little kid. I had the last lesson on Friday night because I didn't want anybody else to see me in practice. I still don't like to have anybody watch me practicing the drums. My sisters I'd be in our basement practicing, and my sisters would run in. It's dinner, and I'd get freaked out when they saw me practicing. I'm a show off when I play a show, but practicing was something else. And so I was very shy with that, and he let me play on his Rogers drum set, and it was the first real drum set I played. And I took lessons for 3.5 years before I got my own drum set. My parents saved up, it was $75 for a Kent set, which I wish I still had, but I traded it in on a Gray Ripple Rogers set in 1965, which set I still do have. I have that set. And I have every set I've ever played on since that 1965 Rogers.
Wow.
I have my original Zildjian 20-inch ride cymbal before they wrote on, what it was, paying ride, crash, medium.
A little stamp.
It wasn't stamped. I remember this was a 20-inch Zildjian ride cymbal, and it was $18 from his drum store in Maplewood, New Jersey. And I stayed friendly with him and close with him for the rest of his life. And he was a marvelous guy and just loved the drums. To him, the drums, he was a pure drummer, a real beatnik hipster, pure. He made me love the drums. Whatever he taught me, and he taught me a lot. What he really taught me was when you're sitting at the drums, it's a privilege. And you always recall the childlike fascination you had with the drums. And I always have. When I sit down, no matter who I'm playing with, I'm 14 years old again. And Don, the playing that I do when I'm not with the E Street Band is this thing I call Max Weinberg's Jukebox, which is my cover band. And we play audience requests of 60s and 70s rock. And I never know what we're going to play, but we don't have a crew. So I get there early, and the drums are all laid out with new heads. They're on the stage, out of the cases. And within a half hour, I put the drums together, I tune them, and within 40 minutes or so, I'm ready to get sounds through the PA. And it's the only mechanical thing I know how to do. I'm not real handy with that, but I can put a drum set together, get it tuned. I'm a great, great drum tuner. And I've done 320 something shows since 2017. Wow. And every single time it's a different drum set. And let me tell you, the range of maintenance on these backline drum sets, I'd say 9.8 times out of 10, they're DW. But the maintenance in backline companies, they'll maintain guitars and amps. They don't maintain. So I tell them, you got to lubricate these screws to really be able to tune. And, but I've played every day. I play a different drum set and I have to start all over. And I'm fortunate when I tour with the E Street Band that, our travel schedule doesn't allow me to do that. And I guess, reached the age where, the drums are ready to go, But when I keep everything very close, so I don't have to move my arms, because the millisecond that I take, if I have to stretch up, that affects your time. So I keep everything real close. And if you look at Buddy or all the great drummers, that's what they did.
Everything is like in a cockpit of a plane. Everything is right there.
It's right there. You don't have to move your elbows.
We have so much experience going back, Max. We could talk for days, and I'm enjoying the heck out of this. And so many words of wisdom for all of you to listen to and play this back and listen really close, because not only your life experiences, but your drumming tips. I'm going to try the seat one as soon as we finish here. That's a really cool idea. I hadn't heard of that.
Oh, it save your back, absolutely.
Yeah. You do see, and I've noticed you do sit up. I mean, I've often said, watch Max's posture when he's playing. I didn't know that you were making it that conscious, but you want to sit with all the weight on your seat so that you're balanced too. And Freddie would often say Buddy was kind of like somebody was holding up the back of his shirt and he was kind of dangling there. Everything was like precise.
Buddy broke all the rules. Buddy's posture, it was actually pretty horrendous in terms of posture, because he crouched down and he had that thing, but he sat very high.
Very high. His snare drum was very high too.
Everything was. I had the privilege of 3 times sitting and playing his drums before a community college show in the 80s.
Did he let you lower the snare drum?
No, I didn't. No, not at all.
Don't touch it, right?
Yeah. No, he didn't say that. He just was like, I didn't ask him. He offered to let me sit down at his drums. And,
sure.
And I'll never forget I was very, very intimidated, but I'll never forget the efficiency that it allowed you in terms of hitting stuff addressing the drum and the sound of the drum. The bass drum was the perfect boom, and it was incredibly responsive. And the snare drum, you really had to have technique, because it was, as they say, tight as a drum.
It was brutal. Yeah, right. There was no room for
tight
error.
as a drum. And but it was a great, I've sat at Ringo's drums. That was a thrill. Sitting at the way he sets his drums. I mean, he sits very high as well. But you get a little more leverage. And with Buddy, it was almost like standing up. Of course, he always said, you have to play with a big Cuban heel so you can keep your heel down.
Yeah, he did have big heels on his shoes. I've got the stems from the Buddy Rich show, which we talked about, which is a show of Buddy playing that we'll be documenting soon on Drum Channel. But one of the edits I did audio-wise is with the bass drum hot. I'll send that to you. It was pretty interesting. In feathering the bass drum, which he did through all those tunes, he accented 2 and 4 slightly, which through all my life until I heard this, I've never heard this bass drum isolated. I'd heard him play a million times with the band where it all blends in, but it's something fun kind of to check out. The secrets of your life that makes your playing so great, the secrets of all the great drummers' lives that makes their playing great. That's part of what we want to do on Drum Channel, is not only impart that information to you, but make you look at all the history of where it came from, because the kids today have to learn where it came from, as we know. And Max, you're a big part of that history. I thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I do agree with you that drumming didn't begin with bless him, and with all due respect, didn't begin with Steve Gadd, and Steve Gadd will be the first guy to tell you that. One of the greatest drummers, and still, of my generation.
Sure,
Steve is. But if you go back, and it's amazing what you can learn to apply to the way you play, whether it's metal, jazz, funk, Latin, rock, hard rock, whatever. It's all in service of the music. And and I particularly find the history of music and drumming in particular quite fascinating. And I mentioned this book, Buddy Rich. I was delighted that the publishers asked me to write the foreword to it, and not because I wrote the foreword, but it forced me to articulate what. And the question I asked myself was, what made Buddy Rich the greatest drummer in the world? Or in other words, what made Buddy Rich great? And I thought about that a long time before I wrote this essay. And it wasn't his drumming. It wasn't his speed. It wasn't his, the technique, the permutations, the combinations, the bus tape. It wasn't any of that. What it was his ability to never give up. No matter the trend, he kept going. And throughout his entire career, from the time, and when you go back to the beginning of his career, when he was 6 years old as a vaudevillian, and he was washed up by the time he was 12, he had that resiliency that I referred to. And he never gave up. To the day he died, he never, ever gave up that desire to excel and to keep doing it, no matter what the changes were.
No, and he demanded that from everybody, as he should, that was around him. And he was on the bus when rock drummers were in big stadiums, and he was going to do what he was doing. That's a very good analysis. I love that.
Well, I have his phone number, right? He gave me his phone number back in the 80s, and he used to have an apartment over on the west side near Lincoln Center. And I used to go over there, and we'd just sit around, and we never talked about drumming. And because I'd always read that he really wasn't that interested. And so we talked about a lot of things, and I called him, without being, and I think also our common Jewish heritage played into that. And, I was playing at the time with Springsteen, and, he didn't, I asked him to come. I invited him to a show once, and he said, "Why? Why would I want to?" No, he had no interest. He was totally honest, unvarnished, and but he would talk about. I had a love for the people he loved, obviously, as musicians and drummers, And to hear him speak about Chick Webb was rhapsodic.
Yes.
He was a teenager when Chick Webb was, and Buddy was looking for himself and where do I go? I mean, to think that he never really played the drum set until he was 18 is just unbelievable, but he absorbed it all. And when he would talk about Chick Webb or Billy Gladstone, who, I mean, I'd heard of Chick Webb mainly because he discovered Ella Fitzgerald, but to hear him talk about his heroes when he was a hero, he loved talking about those eras. And, he once told me that, the tape, the temper, that happened, it happened one time. But after that, it was sort of like a shtick that he felt in a way he had to live up to. And I had a guy in my big band who was actually the last trumpeter to be fired by Buddy Rich. And it's a badge of distinction he wears. And a great trumpeter, incredible jazz trumpeter. And he played in Buddy's last big band when he was right out of college. And, the stories, I did one time have the opportunity at Brookdale College in Lencroft, New Jersey, before a Buddy show to go. I was on the stage with him and I said, I've never really asked you any drumming type things, but how do you do that left hand thing? And he broke it down for me. And he did it, really slow and then worked it up to this incredible speed. And he, watching it slow was interesting because it was almost like brushing the drum, the way his hand moved, and particularly that muscle. Mm-hmm. And it was ungodly. I mean, I never saw anything like that. And to have him go, real slow to real fast and then go back to slow with one hand and not double strokes, single strokes. But when he got it really super fast, it sounded like a double stroke roll, like a buzz roll. And it was interesting to see the armature of his wrist. And, he had very, very strong hands and wrists, tremendous wrists, like circumference wise.
Yeah.
And his handshake was, him and Frank Sinatra. I shook both of their hands. And that's another episode we'll have to do. My meeting with Frank Sinatra, talking about Buddy Rich.
We'll do a whole Buddy Rich get together with a couple.
Oh, he had some really.
Table.
Irv Kotler introduced my wife Becky and I to Frank Sinatra at a concert in New Jersey, and it was great. He said, "Hey Frank, come over here. I want you to meet a friend of mine who plays the drums." Irv was a perfectionist, but he was a sweetheart, great guy.
Yeah.
And I had a good friendship with Irv, and he played on the Dinah Shore show in the 50s and early 60s. I had one of those. Pictures from the drum con. I used to send away for the pictures of the guys. And so my whole back wall, I have pictures of the back wall where I had my drums, my little Kent set, plastered with all these pictures of the famous drummers.
Glossy pictures with the signatures. Yeah.
Chichi Rodriguez and Irv Kotler and, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, all the great drummers, Mel Lewis. So I was a fan. I'm still a fan.
Sure. I got to meet Buddy and spend several occasions with him in his later life when he would come to town to play at the Carnation Pavilion at Disneyland, which he would do once, sometimes twice a year. He would always come out and spend a whole day at Frank DeVito's house or Nick Ciroli's house. And those were both close friends and mentors of mine. They'd always invite me over. I'd be the young third wheel, if you would, that would be there. But it would be the 3 or 4 of us, and he would spend the whole afternoon. And you really see a different side to Buddy. He would talk about some of these friends that you're talking about. And at one point, Frank asked him to show him a few things that, how do you do this, how do you do that? And he played it on Frank's coffee table, which Frank had remodeled his house probably 50 times, but he still has that coffee table because Buddy played on that coffee table. I said, I don't blame you, Frank. You're gonna keep that one no matter what. But love to do some Buddy Rich, memory conversations. I've got a show in our historical section on Drum Channel with Terry Gibbs talking about his experience with Buddy being a roommate of his, and how Buddy kicked him out of the car in the middle of the desert one day. Anyway, you'll see that. I'd heard the rumor. I didn't know if it was true, but I thought if I asked the guy who actually it was supposed to have happened to, did it really happen? Because some of these things get blown up, And he said, no, it really happened. He got pissed at me. And the kids not only have to learn about the experience of Buddy's personality, but obviously, just like you're saying, what he brought to the drum set and how he did what he was doing. You'd mentioned Terry Bozzio a little bit earlier. I talked to him that I was going to be talking with you, and I wanted to get a hold of Jay, and it'd be fun for him and Jay to get together and jam too. So we'll have more conversations with Weinberg family coming up soon on Drum Channel, I hope, and pending on everybody's schedules.
I'm sure that'll happen.
Yep.
Jay, when Jay was very young, he must have been 8 or 9. Terry was playing in New Jersey with Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
And I introduced him to Terry and Jeff, and Terry was very sweet to him. And Jeff Beck came into the Conan show and gave Jay, I think he was sitting in with somebody, and gave Jay a guitar lesson. And I have a picture of this. Jay was like 7. Jeff Beck, Jay's holding his guitar and he's showing him how to play a chord.
We look back at those memories so fondly, and love to carry on with more conversations in the future with you as your schedule permits. I know you've got a tight one coming up, but this has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Don.
Max.
I enjoyed it myself.
Yeah, I definitely did. There's a lot of words of wisdom here we can go back and you should all listen to multiple times. And no matter what, I think when you fill out a form, whenever it would say, what is your age and where were you born, you can say, I was born in the USA in 1984, and you would be absolutely correct. Such an important part of our history, Max. I appreciate it so much. And
Thank you, Don. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you again soon, and we'll see you again soon here on Lombardi Live.